Hello, and thanks for joining me. It had seemed impossible that Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May and the American President Donald Trump would have anything in common at all. The shy, reserved, utterly English vicar's daughter, and the garish and volatile vulgarian who resembles nothing so much as a human Vesuvius in a continuous state of eruption. So, on both sides of the pond, everyone just held their breath anticipating possible diplomatic disaster. But in the end, the meeting between Mrs. May and Mr. Trump in Washington, D.C. last weekend was hailed as an unbridled triumph. It forged not only a personal bond, but also a renewal of the special relationship between Britain and America. Now, this triumph didn't surprise me in the slightest. You see, I think the only person who could have charmed Mr. Trump in this way would be a woman, and only a woman like Mrs. May. You see, we'd seen something like this before in Britain with Mrs. Thatcher. It never ceased to amaze me that there were grown men in her cabinet who would confess that when she tore them off a strip about something, their knees turned to jelly. Something about her reminding them of their nannies or their mothers. Okay, you may laugh and roll your eyes and say, well, that's Britain for you, isn't it? But I think there does seem to be a certain kind of man, particularly a man who's either emotionally fragile or who has some kind of chip on his shoulder about his intellectual achievements, who hugely admires a powerful woman because she is a woman who has power. And so he therefore wants desperately to look good in her eyes. And so also for some Americans, an English accent makes her seem even more special. Or so I'm told. So all Mrs. May had to do was to treat Donald Trump with respect and attentiveness, commend his achievements, and where she did disagree with him, do so with courtesy as well as with steel, and he was bound to be charmed out of his socks, which is precisely what seems to have happened. But there's more to this apparently odd couple than that, because Mrs. May laughed off the obvious personal differences between them, saying opposites attract, but they actually have much in common in what each of them now represents. Both of them have come to power as a result of their respective countries sloughing off national demoralisation and self-doubt, and despite the screams of rage and fury from the left who are watching their post-West agenda being ripped to shreds. For decades, Britain has been run by a governing class which believed its task was the orderly management of decline. Accordingly, it made itself wide open to ideologies bent upon undermining British national identity and Western institutions and values. For decades, America has told itself that it is innately racist and oppressive, and that its belief in its own exceptionalism has been the cause of the world's problems. But now it's voted into office a president who has promised to make America great again and restore it as Americans' own historic and recognisable national home. Britain voted for the return of its own ability to govern itself in accordance with its own culture, laws and traditions. Very similar situation. In both countries, therefore, the people repudiated a political and intellectual elite which had foisted upon them a supposed consensus which flew in the face of the people's deepest attachments and everything they believed in. And in both countries, the people performed accordingly what I would call an act of faith. Britain took a leap in choosing the path of freedom from the EU with all its attendant uncertainties and risks. America took a leap in electing a man who's just torn up the political rulebook. What on both sides of the Atlantic the people were saying was that they believed in their country, they believed in what it stood for, and they believed in their nation's future, that it had a future as a recognisable nation. Now, despite their various differences, Britain and America are family. Britain is America's cultural mothership. In her speech in Philadelphia last Thursday, Mrs. May observed that the special relationship between the two countries had defined the modern world. Very true. But what she was now hailing was a new era of Western renewal brought about by the optimism and hope of the millions who voted for Brexit, which, it must be said, she did not support, and for Donald Trump. Now, of course, beneath all that praise, she was urging the new president to put aside his really rather unsettling inclination towards isolationism and not, quote, stand idly by when the threat is real and when it is in our own interests to intervene. She's worried he may not step up to the plate when it comes to America's historic role in leading the free world, a role that President Obama set out to destroy with calamitous consequences for world peace and justice. But in drawing a sharp and correct distinction between Britain and the Europe Britain is now leaving, Mrs. May underscored the fact that the true creator and defender of the core Western ideas of freedom, justice and democracy is the Anglosphere, Britain and America. Continental Europe is in decline, possibly terminal decline. In deciding to free itself from the grip of this stricken behemoth, Britain has saved itself, potentially, and President Trump knows it. He showed he understood this when he turned up in Britain on the eve of last June's EU referendum to cheer Brexit on. In Washington, Mrs. May appeared to seize the moment and run with it as well. One might even dare to hope that a Western spring might now be on the horizon. This is not going to be plain sailing, though. Indeed, barely had Mrs. May got back to Britain than she was swept up in the tremendous backlash to President Trump's temporary ban on entrance to the United States from a list of countries designated as a terrorist threat to America. Now, the utterly incompetent and chaotic implementation of this policy at the beginning meant British citizens whose backgrounds were linked to those countries seemed to be at risk of being banned from America too. So that had to be unpicked pretty quickly by the British Foreign Office under the direction of Mrs. May. Frankly, it looked as if this immigration policy had been drafted on the back of an envelope by some people in Mr. Trump's core team. But what this furore also has showed with its false accusations against Mr. Trump of racism, calls for insurrectionary protest, and even on Twitter for Donald Trump's assassination, was that the opposition to the president is simply unhinged. With its self-righteous hypocrisy and profound moral confusion, the furore demonstrates all too graphically why the West has been going down all these years, and why, despite what's going to be undoubtedly a very bumpy ride, it's so important that the Anglosphere becomes once again the proponent and defender of Western national identity and its true core values. Well, that's all for now. If you'd like to follow my work, please go to my website, melaniephillips.com, and sign up for my weekly updates and also my rapid response newsletters. Meanwhile, goodbye for now.